Most gardeners are still laying cardboard in their beds, thinking they're doing something smart for soil health. I used to do it too. The problem is, cardboard is slow, inconsistent, and in many cases it actually slows down the soil biology you're trying to build. Instead of feeding microbes, you often end up creating a dry barrier layer that roots struggle to penetrate. I've pulled up beds months later and found cardboard sheets almost intact, while plants above them struggled with weak growth and uneven moisture. If you care about real productivity in your garden, not just following internet trends, you need to move beyond cardboard mulching. There's a much better approach that feeds soil life faster, improves moisture retention, and actually builds fertility instead of just covering the soil. Today, I'm going to walk through the mulch system I use now, a simple two-material combination that outperforms cardboard in almost every garden I've tested it in. And if you're serious about improving your soil long-term, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Most gardening channels focus on quick tips, but here we focus on systems that actually produce better food year after year. The real reason cardboard mulch often fails in productive gardens. Cardboard works on paper because it suppresses weeds and eventually decomposes. The issue is the timeline and the way it interacts with soil biology. In a real food garden, especially raised beds, decomposition speed matters. Cardboard is mostly compressed cellulose with glues and coatings. Soil microbes can break it down, but they need nitrogen and consistent moisture to do it efficiently. If those two things aren't perfectly balanced, the cardboard just sits there. In one of my raised beds that grows tomatoes and peppers, I tested this side by side. One half had cardboard with wood chips on top. The other had the mulch system I'll show you today. 3 months later, the cardboard side still had stiff layers underneath, while the other side had already integrated into the soil. The result was obvious in plant growth. Tomatoes on the cardboard side were about 20% smaller and needed more watering because moisture couldn't move through the layers as evenly. Cardboard isn't evil. It's just not the high-performance mulch system people claim it is. The mulch combination that consistently performs better, is actually a blend of shredded organic carbon and living biology. What works better is a combination of shredded plant matter and worm castings, or worm-processed compost. The simplest version of this system uses just two materials, shredded plant matter and worm castings, or worm-processed compost. That combination, it feeds microbes immediately, instead of asking them to slowly break through a cardboard barrier. In practical terms, the system looks like this. First, you apply a loose carbon mulch layer about 2 to 3 inches thick. This can be shredded leaves, dried grass clippings, chopped straw, or even shredded paper that's already been broken up. Then you top that layer with about 1/2 inch of worm castings or biologically active compost. This thin biological layer is really the key. It inoculates the carbon mulch with billions of microbes that begin breaking it down right away. Instead of waiting months, decomposition starts almost immediately. Why worms outperform cardboard for building soil fertility? The reason this system works so well is because it's based on how soil actually builds itself in nature. Earthworms are honestly one of the most powerful soil builders in any garden ecosystem. Their castings contain beneficial bacteria, fungi, enzymes, and plant-available nutrients that cardboard simply can't provide. That's why many serious growers use worm composting systems to produce a steady supply of castings. A good example is the Topzian 5-layer worm compost bin. Systems like this allow you to convert kitchen scraps and plant waste into worm castings continuously. I'm not saying you have to buy one, but if you want a consistent supply of high-quality compost for mulching and soil building, it's one of the easiest ways to produce it at home. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to look at the one I've tested. The key point is that worm-processed material dramatically accelerates soil development compared to passive materials like cardboard. Here's exactly how I apply this mulch system in raised beds. So, let's say you have a standard 4x8 raised bed growing lettuce, peppers, or tomatoes. After planting, I start with a base carbon layer about 2 inches thick. I often use shredded dry leaves because, well, they break down quickly and allow air to move through the mulch. Just spread them loosely across the soil surface without packing them down. Next, I apply worm castings at a rate of roughly 1 gallon per 8 square feet. That's about 4 gallons for a full 4x8 bed. You don't need a thick layer. Honestly, even a light dusting introduces enough microbial activity to kickstart decomposition. Water the bed thoroughly after applying the layers. Moisture activates microbial life and begins integrating the mulch with the soil. Within a few weeks, you'll notice the carbon layer shrinking as microbes and worms process it. The difference this makes in moisture retention and plant growth is pretty remarkable. One of the biggest improvements I noticed after switching away from cardboard was water efficiency. Cardboard tends to repel water once it dries out. You've probably seen this when irrigation runs off instead of soaking through. Loose organic mulch just doesn't have that problem. In my garden beds, this system reduced watering frequency from every 2 days to about every 4 days during hot weather. That's because the mulch layer acts like a sponge while still allowing water to move freely into the soil. The worm-enriched layer also improves soil aggregation. Over time, the soil develops a crumb structure that holds both air and water, something cardboard just can't provide. This same method even improves hydroponic and container systems. Even if you grow in containers or hydroponic setups, the principle still applies. Many growers run small worm composting systems specifically to produce worm tea and castings for liquid feeding. If you collect the liquid fertilizer from a worm bin spigot, you can dilute it roughly 1 part worm tea to 10 parts water and use it as a microbial drench for soil containers. In hydroponic systems that use cocoa coir or similar substrates, a diluted microbial tea like this helps prevent sterile conditions that often lead to nutrient lockout. The result is stronger root systems and more stable nutrient uptake. Now, the biggest mistake people make when trying this system, the mistake I see most often is using mulch that's too thick. If you pile on 6 or 8 inches of material, you create the same oxygen problem that cardboard causes. Keep the carbon layer between 2 and 3 inches. That's enough to block weeds while still allowing air exchange. Then, refresh the layer every 4 to 6 weeks as it decomposes. Over the course of a growing season, you'll gradually build several inches of rich topsoil without ever tilling. Why does this approach build soil faster than most compost systems? Well, traditional compost piles work, but they take time and space. By composting directly on the bed surface with microbial inoculation, you're essentially running a slow composting process right where plants need it. The worms and microbes process the mulch from the top down, feeding plant roots continuously. In my older beds, this method added almost 2 inches of dark, crumbly soil in one season. Cardboard never did that. Better gardening is about systems, not shortcuts. If there's one lesson I've learned after years of growing food, it's that soil biology drives everything. You don't build great soil by stacking barriers like cardboard. You build it by feeding living systems, microbes, fungi, and worms. Once those systems are working, the garden becomes easier every year. There's less watering, fewer weeds, stronger plants, and better harvests. If you're interested in the worm composting system I mentioned earlier, check the link in the description. It's the setup I've been using to keep a steady supply of castings for this mulch method. And if you found this helpful, subscribe to the channel and share the video with another gardener who's serious about growing better food. Practical knowledge is what turns average gardens into highly productive ones, and that's exactly what we focus on here.